Imagine you are driving down a highway in the United States and you suddenly feel a crushing pain in your chest. Your vision blurs, your breathing stops, and you pull over to the side of the road. In almost every other developed country on Earth, the next step is simple. Someone calls an ambulance. You are rushed to the hospital, and doctors save your life. A few days later, you go home to recover. And the only thing you have to worry about is getting your health back. But in the United States, a medical emergency triggers a secondary layer of sheer terror. As the paramedics load you into the back of the ambulance, a terrifying mathematical equation starts running in your head. Is this ambulance in my insurance network? Which hospital are they taking me to? Will the emergency room doctor be an out-of network contractor? Will this heart attack cost me $5,000? Or will it cost me $50,000? This is the psychological reality of living in America. It is the only country in the developed world where getting sick is treated as a financial crime. And the penalty is bankruptcy. As of 2026, the United States spends roughly $4.5 trillion a year on healthcare. That is more than the entire gross domestic product of Germany. We spend more per person on medical care than any other nation in human history. And yet, the life expectancy of an average American is actually lower than in countries that spend half as much. Over 100 million Americans currently carry some form of medical debt. It is the leading cause of personal bankruptcy in the country. People are losing their homes because they got cancer. They are draining their retirement accounts because they needed an emergency appendectomy. And millions of citizens routinely ration their life-saving medication because they simply cannot afford the monthly refill. But this system is not fundamentally broken. That is the biggest lie sold to the American public. The system is working exactly as it was designed. It is functioning flawlessly as a hyper-optimized wealth extraction machine. To understand how human health was turned into a trillion-dollar extortion racket, we have to trace the origins of how Americans pay for medical care. And it all starts with a total historical accident. We have to go back to 1942. The United States had just entered the Second World War. The economy was running at maximum capacity to build ships and airplanes. And the federal government was terrified of hyperinflation. So President Franklin D. Roosevelt signed an executive order freezing all wages. Employers were legally banned from giving their workers a raise. But companies still needed a way to attract top talent in a highly competitive labor market. If they could not offer more money, they had to offer something else. And a loophole in the tax code provided the answer. Employers realized they could offer fringe benefits, like paying for a worker's hospital care, without violating the wage freeze. This single historical moment completely altered the trajectory of the country. It tied healthcare directly to employment. Suddenly, your ability to see a doctor was legally chained to your boss. By the 1950s, this system was entrenched. Labor unions negotiated for better health benefits instead of higher pay. And the commercial health insurance industry exploded. But for a long time, it operated somewhat reasonably. Hospitals were mostly non-profit institutions run by charities or religious organizations. They charged what things actually cost to keep the doors open. But then came the 1970s, and the absolute turning point in the financialization of American medicine. In 1973, President Richard Nixon signed the Health Maintenance Organization Act, or the HMO Act. This legislation fundamentally changed the DNA of American health. It allowed and encouraged for-profit corporations to enter the medical insurance market on a massive scale. The goal of healthcare shifted. It was no longer about keeping communities healthy. It was about delivering quarterly returns to shareholders on Wall Street. Once the mandate became maximizing profit, hospitals and insurance companies began playing a highly sophisticated game of financial chess. And the weapon of choice was a highly secretive document known as the Charge Master. If you have ever been to a hospital in the United States, you have likely received an itemized bill that defies all human logic. You might see a charge for $35 for a single Tylenol pill. or $100 for a plastic cup to hold your medicine, or $50 for a pair of disposable rubber gloves. These numbers are not based on the actual cost of the items. They're generated by the chargemaster, which is basically a master price list created by hospital administrators. For decades, hospitals kept these lists completely hidden from the public. They would artificially inflate the prices of everything from bandages to MRI scans by 500 or even 1,000%. Why would they do this? Because of how they negotiate with insurance companies. If a hospital wants to get paid $1,000 for a procedure, they cannot just charge $1,000. Because the massive insurance companies always demand a massive discount to show their customers how much money they are saving them. So the hospital raises the price on the chargemaster to $5,000. The insurance company swoops in, demands an 80% discount, and pays the hospital the original $1,000. The insurance company gets to look like a hero to their client, and the hospital gets the exact amount of money they wanted in the first place. It is a completely fabricated economy, a phantom pricing system designed to create the illusion of value. But what happens if you do not have insurance? Or if your insurance refuses to pay? You are the one who gets hit with the $5,000 bill. The system actively punishes the uninsured by charging them the hyper-inflated chargemaster rates. Which is why a completely uninsured person is often asked to pay 10 times more for a blood test than a multi-billion-dollar insurance conglomerate. But the hospitals are only one piece of the puzzle. The true financial dark matter of the American healthcare system lies with the middlemen, specifically a group of shadow corporations known as pharmacy benefit managers, or PBMs. Unless you work in healthcare, you have probably never heard of a pharmacy benefit manager. But they completely control what medications you are allowed to take and exactly how much you pay for them. The three largest PBMs are CVS Caremark, Express Scripts, and Optima Rx. Together, they control nearly 80% of the entire prescription drug market in the United States. Originally, these companies were created to act as a bridge between the pharmaceutical manufacturers and the insurance companies. Their job was supposed to be simple: negotiate bulk discounts on drugs and pass the savings on to the consumer. But over time, they morphed into an unregulated cartel. Instead of passing the savings to you, they operate on a system of hidden rebates. If a drug manufacturer wants their new medication to be covered by your insurance, they have to pay a massive kickback to the PBM. And to afford that kickback, the manufacturer simply raises the retail price of the drug. This is why a vial of insulin, which costs about $3 to manufacture, and was invented nearly a century ago, can cost an American citizen over $300 a month. The price is artificially inflated to feed the middlemen. The PBMs take their cut from the manufacturer. They take another cut from the pharmacy. And they take a final cut from the insurance company. They produce absolutely nothing. They do not invent medicine. They do not treat patients. They simply sit in the middle of the transaction and siphon billions of dollars out of the pockets of sick Americans. And speaking of the insurance companies, you might be wondering why they allow prices to get this high. Shouldn't an insurance company want healthcare to be cheap so they have to pay less money out of pocket? The answer involves a brilliant piece of legislative irony. When the Affordable Care Act was passed in 2010, it included a rule known as the medical loss ratio. This rule stated that insurance companies had to spend at least 80% of the premiums they collected on actual medical care. They were only allowed to keep 20% for administrative costs and profit. The government thought this would stop insurance companies from price gouging. But the massive conglomerates like United Healthcare and Cigna found the loophole immediately. If your profit is legally capped at 20% of the total pie, the only way to make more money is to make the entire pie bigger. If medical costs go up, premiums go up, and 20% of a larger premium results in a massive increase in actual dollar profits. The insurance companies actually have a financial incentive to let the cost of healthcare skyrocket. Because the more expensive healthcare becomes, the more money they are allowed to take off the top. It is a perfect feedback loop of inflation. The hospital raises prices. The PBM raises drug costs. The insurance company points to these rising costs to justify raising your monthly premium. And the federal government subsidizes the entire circus through Medicare and Medicaid. But in the last decade, and even more, ruthless player has entered the game. Private equity. Wall Street private equity firms realized that American healthcare is essentially a captive market. If you want to buy a new television, you can shop around and compare prices. But if you're bleeding from a car accident, you cannot negotiate the price of a trauma surgeon. Your demand for the product is completely inelastic. You will pay whatever it takes to stay alive. Sensing this vulnerability, private equity funds began buying up physician practices, ambulance companies, and emergency rooms across the nation. One of their most profitable tactics is known as surprise billing. Here's how it works. You carefully research a hospital to make sure it is covered by your insurance network. You go in for a scheduled surgery, and everything seems fine. But weeks later, you get a massive bill in the mail for thousands of dollars. It turns out that while the hospital itself was in network, the anesthesiologist who put you to sleep was a private contractor working for a private equity-backed medical group. And they are completely out of network. You had no choice in who your anesthesiologist was while you were unconscious on an operating table. But you are now legally responsible for their hyperinflated bill. While the government has passed some recent legislation to curb surprise billing, private equity firms continuously find new loopholes to squeeze profit from vulnerable patients. They cut nursing staff to the absolute minimum. They replace highly trained doctors with cheaper mid-level practitioners. And they strip mine the medical facility for maximum yield before selling it off. The cascading effect of this system on the American economy is devastating. And it goes far beyond just medical debt. It affects every single worker in the country through a phenomenon known as job lock. Because health insurance is still tied to employment, millions of Americans are trapped in jobs they absolutely despise. A father cannot quit his corporate job to start a small business because his daughter needs expensive asthma medication. And he would lose his employer-sponsored insurance. An older worker cannot retire early because they have to wait until they are 65 to qualify for Medicare. Entrepreneurs are discouraged from taking risks, and wages remain artificially stagnant. When you ask an employer for a raise, they often point out that the cost of your health insurance premium went up this year, so they cannot afford to increase your actual salary. The wealth that should be going into your paycheck is being secretly diverted to pay for the bloated inefficiencies of the healthcare cartel. We are living in a society where GoFundMe has essentially become the national healthcare provider. Families are forced to beg strangers on the internet to fund chemotherapy treatments, while the CEOs of the major health insurance conglomerates take home tens of millions of dollars a year in bonuses. The system relies on the sheer exhaustion of the American public. The billing codes are too complex to decipher. The insurance denial letters are written in deliberate legal jargon designed to make you give up and pay out of pocket. And the appeals process requires hours of waiting on hold that working-class people simply do not have. It is a war of attrition waged against the sick. And until we stop treating human health as a commodity to be traded on the stock market, the prices will continue to rise. The medical bankruptcies will continue to mount. And the American public will remain hostages to a system that views their illness not as a tragedy, but as a business opportunity. Thank you for watching. If you believe this system needs to be exposed, please share this video to spread the truth. And let me know in the comments below. What is the most outrageous medical bill you have ever received in America?